Hey everybody, welcome back to another roundtable discussion brought to you by transparentmediatruth.com and my website, morelawsmoreproblems.com. Today we have a fantastic discussion for you guys. You're going to be so excited. I don't think our guests even really need an introduction, but we're going to give them one anyway just so you guys know who they are. So I'm going to put this up on the screen for you. We have Dr. Sherry Tenpenny. You can get all information at drtenpenny.com. And we're going to provide a bunch more links in the description of this video. So make sure you go in the description and click those links. Everything we talk about, the links are going to be there. Dr. Tenpenny, she graduated from the University of Toledo with a Bachelor of Arts and Biology and a minor in music, cum laude in 1980. And then she went on to the Kirksville College of Osteopathic Medicine and graduated cum laude in 1984 as a Doctor of Osteopathy. The next guest we have today on our round table is Dr. Andrew Kaufman. Dr. Kaufman is licensed and board certified in psychiatry and forensic psychiatry. He's a former assistant professor of psychiatry at SUNY Upstate Medical University, a former medical instructor of hematology and oncology at the Medical University of South Carolina. He was a psychiatry residency at Duke University. He's a doctor of medicine from the Medical University of South Carolina, and he holds a bachelor's in science and biology from MIT. And you can find him at andrewkaufmanmd.com. And we're going to leave other links to videos that he's done and other work that he's known for, again, in the description of this video. And last but not least of our guests on this round table today, we have Marcy Cravat. And Marcy Cravat is an award-winning filmmaker and documentarian. And you can find her at pasalonpictures.com. So what I'm going to do now is pass it right over to Marcy. So here you go, Marcy.
Hi, thank you so much, Brandon, for this opportunity. And I want to also extend thanks to Rob Rubin from Transparent Media Truth, who's making this possible and brought us all together. And I couldn't be more thrilled to be connecting with the guests that we have here today. They were my very first choice, and I'm just thrilled that they're both sitting there. I would like to get right smack into this because, as you may know, we've got a lot of things I'm hoping we can cover. So the first thing I wanted to do was clarify a misunderstanding. And basically, I just want to get confirmation on whether or not I have this right. SARS-CoV-2 is the virus, and COVID-19 is the name of the alleged disease. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
That's correct.
Yeah,
Okay.
SARS-CoV-2 is the name of the virus, and there are now even the New York Times was reporting last week that virus has now morphed into at least 30 different subtypes. So yes, that's the name of the virus, and COVID-19 is the condition that the virus supposedly causes, which is the cough, the dry cough, the body aches, the fever, all of those things, the shortness of breath. That's the disease. The other is the virus.
Okay, that's a really important distinction. Dr. Kaufman, were you going to say something about that too?
Yeah, I just want to clarify that even though Dr. Tenpenny is correct about how they've assigned the names, it still is a point of confusion because COVID-19 stands for Coronavirus Disease 2019. So it still implicates a virus in the disease, even though there's no proof of that. And the SARS-CoV-2 is correctly a virus that they claim to have identified and associated with the illness.
Okay, I find this very fascinating because somebody had to have made a decision or signed off on a decision to name the alleged disease after the virus that they suspect before there has been any proof. It's sort of like framing somebody for murder and then naming the incident after the person that's been framed, but there's never been a trial and there's never going to be a trial. It's very clever and very manipulative the way that this has been done. And I would like to know if either of you know how diseases get named, because I'm really, really curious how somebody made this decision.
I really like that analogy because not only is there no trial, there's not even any witnesses. they're connecting the two things together. That's really a good analogy. That's very good.
Okay. Yeah, good. I'm glad you like that. I was racking my brain over that one.
That was quite good. Yeah.
Okay, so another thing about this naming if the disease, the alleged disease that we're seeing was named, say, the mystery virus or the mystery disease, and they could have picked the Latin name for mystery or something to make it sound more sophisticated, but if it had been called the mystery disease, this would have empowered the whole public engage in dialogue and curiosity and ask questions. Could it be the food that we're eating? Could it be the air we're breathing? Could it be the water we're drinking? Is it a virus? Is it a bacteria? Uh, I just find this really manipulative to name this disease this before it's been proven. And I find it shutting doors down to people, empowering people to think for themselves. Do you, either one of you, have comments on that?
Yeah, well, Marcy, those are good points, but in order to name a new disease, you should first have evidence of a new disease. And since I've been following this from the very beginning, and I know I was one of the first people to publicly question what's going on, there's really no evidence of any excess mortality above the normal levels from prior years. So, and these things are monitored very closely. There are a number of groups, for both public and private, who monitor mortality rates from year to year because they're looking for a signal that of a new disease that would require further investigation, like you suggested, to look for a cause. So there's really been no evidence of that. So it's really a mystery why they would even call it disease and why they would pursue all of these severe policies in the realm of finance and human rights, etc.
And in fact, they've labeled it pandemic, which complicates it further because, like you said, when there's a pandemic, we expect to see people dying all over the place, and these mortality rates haven't gone up. They've just been reassigned, so it appears. What do you both think about that?
Well, one of the things that I've worked really hard in the last year of trying to do is to take these infections and call them infections instead of calling them diseases, because an infection by definition comes and goes. And it's, nobody gets all freaked out over the general flu or having a sinus infection or a bladder infection or bronchitis or, something along those lines. They just don't have those, they don't have a process with an infection, and it doesn't sound nearly as scary as calling it a disease, because that sounds so frightening to people. And I think that calling it a disease does make it scary. And a disease is something that comes and stays. It's something like MS, muscular dystrophy, seizure, chronic seizure disorder, cancer. I mean, those things, that they come and they stay for a while. So I wouldn't even, the fact that we're even talking about, does this particular, first of all, does the virus exist? Second of all, does it exist in the form that they say it exists? Thirdly, does it cause a process for which people have symptoms? And is that symptom just an infection that's going to come and go, as opposed to calling a disease of something that's going to come and stay? So there's a lot of nomenclature issues surrounding this entire thing, in my opinion. Mm-hmm. I'd love to hear what Dr. Kaufman says about that.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I think I agree with you. And words are very important because they influence people in certain ways. And even the word virus itself comes from the Latin, which means a poison or noxious substance. So just using that word itself denotes something sinister and something that will damage us. So if you are thinking about it in those terms, it could be potentially very scary. And I think most of the procedures that have been mandated by public health officials and governments have added to the fear and concern, right? Like all of this personal protective equipment that's required, even asking people to wear, face and mouth covering masks out in public and to be afraid of each other, all really stimulates and amplifies the fear and concern from getting sick by people. That is, part of this campaign.
Yes, we're going to get into that mask thing. I definitely want to get into that. Before we do, though, I wonder if one of you could explain what Koch's postulates are, fairly in a concise manner so the general public can grasp it. And secondly, can you both answer if you were taught this in medical school? I had spoken with Dr. Thomas Cowan, and he claims that this was driven into the heads of doctors in medical school. And then I've talked to other doctors who don't seem to know what it is. I'm trying to figure out is it truly a gold standard? And were you taught this in medical school? And has it been used for the last several decades? And if it has been used, who made the choice? The same one that named, who made the choice to not perform Koch's postulates? So could one of you explain what Koch's postulates are and take us down that road?
Yeah, I've certainly done a lot of research on this, but I'm sure Dr. Tenpenny also has some things to offer. But Koch's postulates, which weren't originally formulated by Koch, but they were characterized in the late 1800s. And it's basically the proponents of germ theory. It's their own rules for how you prove if a microorganism causes a disease. And they're quite common sense and quite simple. There are 4 rules. The first rule is that there should be a consistent set of symptoms that defines a disease, and the infectious organism should be present in people with those symptoms and not with people who are healthy. The second rule is that they should be able to isolate that infectious agent in its pure form from people who are afflicted with the illness in question. For bacteria, it should be grown in a pure culture, which may not be possible for viruses. I'm sorry to interrupt, but I have to sign for a delivery really quick.
Okay, well, maybe Dr. Tenpenny could go on. Could you tell me if you learned about Koch's postulates? Is this something that you were familiar with?
Honestly, I graduated from medical school like a long time ago, and I would have only remembered it from that particular perspective. And I think I remember when we did microbiology that it was something that was talked about maybe in passing, and maybe it's something that you had to learn for an exam. Like, here's the list of things. Which one is not part of Koch's postulates or something like that?
Something like that.
Okay. But something other, but not anything that you continued on with, because we all just learned how to prescribe antibiotics. And if you had a fever, then you needed an antibiotic. It didn't matter whether you had any of those pathogens that showed up and were reproducible. We don't routinely do blood cultures and throat cultures and sinus cultures and all that on people, except maybe if you're looking for like a quick strep in the office or something. So and I think that a lot of it was really, the way that I remember it was more just as a historical perspective rather than from something that had any present day clinical value.
Okay. So, Dr. Kaufman, you left off on number 2. So number 3 of the Koch's postulates and number 4?
Yeah. So number 3 is that you should be able to take that isolated and purified infectious agent and put it into a healthy host. And that healthy host would then come down with the same disease as the initial person that you isolated the organism from. And then you would be able to, step 4, isolate and purify that infectious agent from the host that you infected and made sick. And in my medical school, it was somewhat similar to Dr. Tenpenny. I do remember that they emphasized the importance of Koch's postulates in microbiology, but they did not go on to show any evidence of how they were satisfied for any particular disease. And this was a kind of a recurring theme in medical school because there's so much information that they want you to consume and actually memorize rather than think through, that they often say things are such and such a way, but then they don't go through the studies that prove that. And we might talk about vaccines at some point, and the same thing is definitely true about vaccines in the medical education. And recently, I have a friend who's in nursing school, and she was taking microbiology. And so I was curious. I asked her, did you cover Koch's postulates? And she said, oh, yeah, the professor said how important they were. And then I said, well, did they go through the evidence for any diseases satisfying Koch's postulates? And she said that they did not. So it seems like this has some consistency throughout the education.
Okay.
There are times, by the way, where there are papers that claim to have satisfied Koch's postulates, including for one of the SARS viruses, the original one, SARS-CoV-1, which was said to be responsible for the 2003 SARS outbreak. But that paper is very problematic, and in my analysis, they actually didn't satisfy any of the postulates.
So you actually have a video where you explain this beautifully. You go through about 6 different papers, I believe. It was 5 or 6 different papers that all claim that the Koch's postulates had been fulfilled, and you in very detailed way demonstrate that that is simply not the case. And in fact, you went so far as to say that there were some lies in there. I think it's really important for people that want to understand this. They should go to the link below and have a look at that video. What I want to understand is Koch's postulate still considered a gold standard test?
Well, I don't think they would put it as the title of a paper as recently as 2003 if it wasn't still considered to be quite important, and they wouldn't keep it in the curriculum. But it seems in the world of viruses that they generally seem to not pay too much attention. There are variations of Koch's postulates that have been applied to viral diseases. And in the paper from 2003 that I mentioned, they adapted a paper from Rivers from 1937, where he basically said that Koch's postulates are too difficult to prove in viruses, so we should make them easier so that we could prove those in viruses. And unfortunately, in this paper, they tried to apply those criteria, but were unable to satisfy even those. So I think that this is something that can easily be ignored if you want to say that an infectious agent that's a microorganism is causing a disease. But if you want to actually prove it, I'm not sure how you can ignore those, because how could, for example, a disease be caused by a microorganism if that microorganism is present in people who are healthy and sick?
Yeah, and I would like to just say, pardon me for being the language cop, but these are infections we're talking about. We're not talking about diseases. We've come so accustomed to calling the flu a disease. And so that makes it sound so deadly and so terrible. And it's an infection. It comes and goes, And to go along with what Dr. Kaufman said, is there any proof that A causes B? Whether you call it an infection or a disease or an infectious disease, is there anything that does that? And it's so interesting what he just said about, it's so difficult to prove, so therefore we're not going to do it. It's sort of like, people don't think as well, so we're going to lower the standards of SAT scores so it's easier to get into school, instead of saying, wait a minute, you need to come up to the challenge, really meet the standard of what these Koch postulates are in terms of proving this. Instead, it's like, no, let's lower the standards. And so you see that across the board in so many different things, and like education, getting into medical school, getting into graduate school, getting into college. It's like your people aren't thinking as well because they've got aluminum in their head or whatever, and stuff.
We're
like
gonna get to that.
So instead of cleaning the aluminum out, making them think better, we'll just make it be easier to get into those schools. So I think that's a great analogy. That was really, really good.
Yeah, thank you both for those fantastic answers. Okay, to move on to the testing that is happening. Now, again, I'm not a scientist, so please, I'm going to state how I understand this, which might be helpful to both of you, because you'll see how the general public gets this if they go this far to think about this. The PCR test that is being used is a surrogate test, and the person who invented the test claimed that it should never be used for diagnosis. The PCR test is an amplification test. So you're looking for a sequence, not an infection. You're looking for a sequence within the RNA. So they take a snippet of the RNA and they amplify it. And each cycle is doubling the amplification. When the amplification gets up to around 35, 36 cycles, they start to see a lot of these little needles in the haystack, and they say they have a bunch of false positives. But because there's no gold standard to compare it to, there's not really any way to make an assessment. Now, if you, this comes from Dr. Cowan, if you amplify up to 60 cycles, essentially everybody would show the sequence for SARS-CoV in their RNA. So this makes me wonder if you have, do we have tuberculosis sequences and cancer sequences and all kinds of things in our RNA that if we just look for them, we'll see them? Because just because we have them, that doesn't necessarily mean we're sick. Do I have this right, or can you guys clarify?
Yeah, Marcy, you're right about some things for sure about the amplification. And I think an easy way to understand that is if you just go to your stereo and turn the volume way, way up, what you'll notice is that you start hearing some noise in the signal, right? Because what you're doing is increasing the amplification. And when you increase the amplification, you increase the signal and also the noise. And so if you amplify it enough, you could misinterpret the noise for a signal. But I don't think that's the most important problem with the test. What I think is most problematic is how they obtained the genetic sequence in the first place. Because what they did was they had some people who seemed to have a respiratory illness, and they did a procedure where they put a fiber optic scope down their throat into their lungs, into the bronchi and bronchioles, and they squirt some fluid in there and swish it around and then suck it back up. And it's going to have a mixture of a number of things. It's going to have cells from your lung. It's going to have cells from your immune system. It's going to have cells from the microorganisms that normally live in your body, such as bacteria and fungi. And then it's also going to have free genetic material that's been shown to be in lung fluid, including RNA. And there may be, if the person has a disease, there are going to be exosomes, which are small particles that your cells secrete, more so during an acute infectious process. And they have a signaling or other functions that actually help you heal from the disease. So since there are all those sources of genetic material, the way that they prepared the sample is they just took that lung fluid. They didn't do any purification steps, but they mixed it with an enzyme to dissolve the membrane. So anything inside of a cell membrane would be released into the solution and they could measure it. And then they simply had various probes and did genetic assays, including PCR. And they found a sequence, and then they sequenced that. And what they did to say that it was a coronavirus was they compared the sequence to a sequence of SARS-CoV-1, that other first SARS virus from 2003. And by the way, that was actually found out by the same exact procedure. So in order to determine that these two were related, they said that there was 79.6% sequence identity between the two samples. But just for a frame of reference, between humans and chimpanzees, there's 96% sequence identity. So in other words, we're more closely related to chimpanzees than these two sequences are related to each other. And it's even more pronounced than that because these sequences only have a few tens of thousands of base pairs, whereas the amount of base pairs in the human genomes is orders of magnitude higher. So we're talking about two sequences that really you can't even say they're related. And then further, you don't even know what the source of the RNA was. So developing a test for that RNA, you have no idea what you're testing for, even if the test is 100% accurate.
Wow.
Wow. Wow, Jinx.
And I'd like to add on top of that, once they made this determination, and it goes back to your question, Marcy, about how did they name this? Well, now you've got a better idea of how they kind of named it. They just sort of said it was sort of like, it was kind of sort of like, and so therefore we're going to name it that. And then, the other types of testing things, now they do nasal swabs, throat swabs, fecal swabs, oh, by the way, this virus can get passed in your stool, so now people can't go to the bathroom, and so and then it's like, now this whole social distancing, like they assume that this thing springs 6 feet apart. Did they ever test 6 feet? Like, did they ever make somebody sneeze and see how far that went? Or did they just randomly pick a 6 foot sort of distancing between? And now now they're going to be doing blood testing, and they're going to be testing for antibody levels. And they've thrown all of that data, everything that Dr. Kaufman said, and then all these other types of samples from the at least 10, probably as many as 30 different substrains of what this virus is supposed to be, all in the same pot. So we are never, ever going to know what the actual denominator is if we use theirs, even by their standards, right? I mean, we don't necessarily agree with what they're doing, but let's assume that we go with their standards. Even by their standards, they're never going to have an accurate denominator. So if you have 100 people die and 1,000 people are sick, and you can actually identify that they're sick from the virus, which let's just assume that we can by their standards, well, that's a 10% death rate. But if you have 100 people die and you have 1 million people that test positive but are asymptomatic, or 10 million people that test positive and asymptomatic, that makes that 100 people who die ever more inconsequential and 0.000 something of a percentage. So all of this fabricated data is what I call all of this. It's fabricated data. I mean, to get an IgG antibody, which is that next level of testing. I mean, with IgG antibodies, does that mean that you had the SARS-CoV-2 infection? Or does that mean that you had an infection somewhere over the last 60 years with one of the 4 coronaviruses that cause up to 20% of infectious illness every year? I mean, how do you differentiate that and move that out? And so they're setting up all of these public policies, and you can't go back to school and you can't go back to work based on air. It's not based on science.
It's a big, it feels like a nothing burger.
It's a big, that's the expression I've been using. It's a big fat nothing burger, you know?
Yeah.
And
so now these tests that you're referring to are called serology, correct?
Yeah. And if you drill down on all of this, I mean, wow, it's really messy data.
Okay. So these serology tests, they have the one that supposedly tests for old antibodies and one that tests for new antibodies. But Dr. Mikowitz has said that if you've had a live virus vaccine ever in your life, you will show antibodies for SARS-CoV whatever. Is that true?
Well, I would say that in general, these kind of antibody tests are much less specific than you might think. Many of us have the understanding based on various teaching that an antibody is only interacts with one antigen, but actually there's a lot of cross-reactivity. And for example, if you look at the HIV antibody test, you'll see that there's over 60 conditions that can give you a false positive, including if you've recently received various vaccines like a hepatitis B vaccine, or even pregnancy after your first child can cause a positive HIV test. So if I might share my screen for a minute, I wanted to show you an FDA document. And right here, this is, can you all see that?
Yes,
So this is from the FDA, March 20th. And this is the authorization letter for an antibody test made by Cepheid Pharmaceutical Company. And an authorization is different from an approval, because to get approval, you have to submit a lot of testing data. And one thing that's really important when you develop a diagnostic test is that you have a gold standard to compare the test to. And that's the only way you can calculate the accuracy and the error rate of the test. And since there's never been a virus isolated for comparison to any of the diagnostic tests, they've never had a gold standard for comparison. But here, I want to draw your attention to number 2 here under the criteria for issuance of authorization. And what it says here is, based on the totality of scientific evidence available to the FDA, it is reasonable to believe. So it's not known, it's not a sure thing, right? It's not certain, it's only reasonable to believe. And we know that belief, it requires faith and not knowledge, that your product may be effective. We're not sure it's effective, it may be, in diagnosing COVID-19. So I think this is really all you need to know about the accuracy of the test, because that's from the FDA themselves, who are charged with investigating and authorizing the use of these tests. And based on their totality of evidence, they can't be sure that it's good for anything, really. That's what they're clearly saying.
Wow. So I have heard it argued that the serology tests have been tested in these, random samplings. But I have to wonder if it's true that there's a connection between having had a, say, live virus vaccine, like a flu vaccine. Wouldn't a random sampling have to include the vaccinated and the unvaccinated? I mean, if you just take a random sampling from the population, almost everybody's going to have been vaccinated. That doesn't seem very random to me. I know they're trying to say it's random because it's old and young and different ethnicities and all of this, but to me, you'd have to clarify that this is a group that's been vaccinated and this is a group that has not been vaccinated. Does that make sense?
Well, there's so many unknown things about this test. I mean, so first of all, we don't really know what it's measuring because it's not compared with any gold standard of diagnostic test for the disease. So there's really no way. And then also there's no studies published describing how they developed the test. So all we really can say about it is, as far as I know of, is what the FDA said, which is that they're not sure that it tests for this disease or not.
So what I've been saying from the beginning, when they keep saying everybody's got to get tested, get tested, get tested, get tested, it's like, what are you testing? I mean, what are you testing? Are you testing a family of 36 viruses that have been around for 60 years and 4 of them that we know cause illness in everybody? Are we testing the current virus that we don't even know what it is? And even when all this supposedly, Chinese Wuhan virus that was coming out, was that we're treating it all like there's one virus causing all this infectious process all over the world? Is the one in China the same as the one in Iran, and the same as the one in Italy, is the same in New York, and in what are we testing? And now we want to do an antibody test. And is that antibody test specific enough for this particular virus that they claim is causing enough problem that we need to shut down the entire global economy and ruin lives and ruin businesses and ruin everything else? Is it specific enough for that? I mean, even when they do influenza testing, they do these swabs and then they separate, is it influenza or not influenza? Then they have to subtype it to see if that subtyping virus matches the virus that they put in the vaccine, right? And so they need to do these other subtestings, but yet we're supposed to do a random drive-by sampling in the parking lot of Target to make sure that we have some sort of an antibody level, either on a finger prick or jabbing a Q-tip up our nose out there in public, right in front of our car, right? I mean, how gross is that? To do a sample to say that somehow we're not infected. And what happens if we do have an IgG or an IgM antibody, but we're asymptomatic or otherwise totally healthy? Does that mean we need to go into quarantine? What is it? What are you testing? And yet we need to do more and more and more and more and more testing to prove something that has no connection to, sort of like what you started out by saying, the murder and the crime scene. I mean, we don't have any connection between a virus and an infection, but yet now we have to get some sort of a certificate to say that we don't have it, and we have to continue to wear these masks to keep us from spreading something we don't have.
It's really seeming like a house of cards to me. And the problem is the public has been so manipulated, not only from the naming of the infection, but calling it a pandemic when we don't see increased mortality rates. The public is being herded, and we'll get into that as we keep going. I want to move on to this next thing because we really covered the naming very well, I think. And thank you both for those incredible answers. I was having symptoms myself of all kinds of things, and I was working with a naturopath. And it turns out I was tested for glyphosate and for heavy metals in various tests. They all came back very high, and the heavy metals that were tested were barium, strontium, aluminum, and mercury. And I like to say I have no cavities. I've never had a cavity, so there's no metal in my mouth. I started noticing these heavily aerosoled skies, and I was wondering where these metals are coming from. So I tested my rainwater 4 times after days of heavy aerosol spraying. And when I got the test back from Basic Lab in Chico that charges $59.99 for a geoengineering test, they came back very high in barium, strontium, and aluminum. So I'm starting to see dots here. So I've been detoxing. I've been on a constant detox to get this out of my body. Okay, in Wuhan, China, one of the very first interviews that I saw after the outbreak was a Chinese medical doctor who said that their skies had been heavily aerosoled for about 6 months, and that they had more admissions, people being admitted into hospitals with respiratory problems than they'd ever seen before. And she also mentioned something about the toxins that they were seeing coming from the air being in combinations that they'd also never seen before. Now, we also know that there was a mandatory flu vaccine rollout in Wuhan. And we all know that this was the premier 5G rollout city. Now, in Italy, I was in Italy last summer, and I was in northern Italy. I was in the exact region where this is, in Tuscany. And I can tell you those skies were highly engineered. In fact, they had snow in May. A snowstorm in May, after watching the sky go from stripes to whiteout to Doppler radar to a storm. And nobody seems to be making the connection, but I know that's true because I saw it with my eyes. Now, I also have heard that they had a mandatory vaccine flu rollout as well, and they also are dealing with the 5G. So I want to understand. First, I want to, as we go forward, I want to call this mystery illness because I don't want to keep consenting to that name. Why are we not looking at these toxins? I mean, they seem like elephants in the living room. Why is this? Why are we being called, quote, conspiracy theorists or dissenters or whatever for not taking a look at things that are looking to be very much causal agents? Both of you, I'd love to get a response from both of you if you can.
Well, I would say it's because it doesn't fit the current agenda. I mean, we don't look for, I mean, one of the things about Western medicine and the medical industrial complex, if you want to limp it all together or lump it all together like that, is that they have a current agenda, and and you have to just stick with the propaganda, and you have to stick with the current message, or you're deplatformed from social media, you're kicked off of YouTube, you are censored, you are disparaged. Like, Dr. Kaufman and I've been kicked around a little bit for, saying things that wasn't exactly mainstream medical. And so it doesn't fit with the current narrative. And then if you try to look for other underlying causes, I mean, that's what integrative medicine really does. I mean, it started out being called alternative medicine, that was an either or, and then complementary medicine, which sounded like the radish sitting on the edge of the plate. And then now it was like integrative medicine, which to me, it's like you look for underlying causes and you use whatever tool in your toolbox that you have. And we happen to have a very large toolbox as opposed to mainstream medical that just has a prescription pad as their only tool in their toolbox. And so if you aren't fitting in, so if you get outside of that narrative and outside of what that goose stepping agenda is, and they've got the media machine as their mouthpiece, and they've got all the money in the world to propagate their message and to disparage and shut down anybody that tries to connect the dots outside of what the current agenda is. So if you want to look at aerosolized things, at 5G, you want to look at the connection between all the vaccines, and that they did do an experimental vaccine 6 weeks before they started seeing all this outbreak and all this death of elderly people in the northern Italy area, in that whole Lombardy region, that they had tried a brand new flu shot. Flucelvax is what we would call it here in the US, and it's the one that uses dog kidney cells, which have been shown to be highly tumorigenic. And so they started all of that. That was another element of experimentation. But if it doesn't go with the agenda of this is SARS-CoV-2 that's causing a global pandemic, resulting in a disease called COVID-19, for which we have to treat as a lung disease and put people on ventilators, blowing out their lungs, and ventilator mismanagement, because in my opinion, it's a blood disease, not a lung disease. And so we've got all of these different elements, and anybody that tries to bring that forward and speak a different set of facts of what we find of other facts, you're labeled conspiracy theorist, shutdown, tinfoil hat, anti-science, all the names.
Dr. Kaufman, do you have any words on that?
Yes, I definitely have some things to say, and I would agree that the name is problematic, but I wouldn't go with mystery illness. I would call it manufactured illness.
Good, better. Okay.
But as far as the toxicology as a cause of disease, I have come to learn that actually most illness is caused by toxic exposure. And this is nothing new. The geoengineering program was started many years ago, and it's been disclosed by the CIA and other government authorities. So it's not, although most people are unaware of it and may consider it a conspiracy theory, there's a clear disclosure that this has been going on. And of course, the tests don't lie. If you found barium, strontium, and aluminum in your rainwater, well, then it's in your rainwater. And there aren't many industrial sources of barium and strontium. So that would be something easy to narrow down. But I think this goes back to the days in the 19th century when doctors were typically prescribing mercurials and arsenicals as a treatment. And they did not realize, even at the time, or did not wish to admit, that it was actually causing much more illness than it was treating so they were giving mercury and arsenic related compounds to people. And this has continued over the last century and been amplified to a very high degree, so that we are on a daily basis, even despite our best efforts to try and minimize it, we're still exposed to over 1,000 different chemicals that are created industrially through various processes. Many of these are actually contained in vaccines, but they're also contained in our food supply and our personal hygiene products. They're in the air, they're in the water, they're in the ground. So we are exposed to so many things that way, and these things do cause quite a lot of disease. In medical school, they don't really cover almost anything about toxicology, except with respect to pharmaceuticals, but they don't really tell us how many people die from pharmaceuticals as a result of the toxicity, which is quite substantial. There's an article in the Journal of the American Medical Association that estimates 128,000 people die on an annual basis from taking pharmaceutical drugs as directed. And that is a gross underestimate because it doesn't include many categories, but we'll take it since it's there, the establishment's numbers. So since there's no education, and there's no education in medical school about detoxification, even a simple thing as having adequate hydration can support your body's detoxification measures. And you know, our bodies are actually designed with this in account, because we generate our own toxic chemicals through our own metabolic processes, right? Such as free radicals. And we make our own antioxidants, and we also eat some of them in a healthy diet, things like vitamin C and vitamin E. So this is part of our natural biology, but our biology is not prepared to handle certain types of toxins that were not really present in the natural environment until the industrial age, and especially things like pharmaceuticals, organic compounds that are pesticides and herbicides, and certain heavy metals that are part of industrial mining processes like aluminum and mercury.
Okay, those were, again, great responses. You're giving me so much to think about here, more than I think I prepared for.
And can I add something to that, Marcy?
Sure.
Because
yes.
I totally agree with what he says. And when you boil it down, when you really boil it down to what causes illness, really at the very base core level, it's an excess of something or a deficiency of something. And it's pretty simple, right? I mean, it's an excess of, and I would add, when he was talking about the pesticides and organophosphates, I mean, anything that's petroleum based, that comes from, the petroleum chemical base, which is where all of our pharmaceuticals come from. We're not used to that. So, our body doesn't have any intrinsic detoxification things to go along with these synthetic molecules that have come along. And so at the very core of what causes illness is it's an excess of something, excess chemicals, excess pesticides, excess heavy metals, too much food, too much white sugar. I mean, we could go on and on. There's an excess of something or a deficiency of something. There's certain nutrients that we need that are all part of the Krebs cycle and are there, that we learned those in biochemistry for a reason. and then we say that, taking manganese and magnesium is like, like woo-woo medicine. And so, I mean, it's a deficiency of things, a deficiency of the right mindset, the deficient, an excess of bad thoughts, bad emotions versus like good thoughts and good emotions. And so if you kind of boil it down to the very lowest level of what health is all about, it's just that. And in my opinion, what physicians should be doing, instead of like tinkering around with vaccines and drugs, is that they should be looking at and doing an assessment of what do we need to get rid of and what do we need to put in, and then everything else will be, for the most part, will be so much better. Anything is like a bell curve. You've always got outliers on each end. But that is sort of like what we need to be thinking about in terms of this overall supposed infection, illness, and cooping people up in their houses and making them wear masks and gloves the rest of their life.
I couldn't agree more. It all seems so counterintuitive to me. And these things that you are both talking about seem very much like common sense to me. I don't understand how we've got so far away from that.
I always want to have a bumper sticker, Marcy, that says "Common sense ain't so common."
That's good. That's a good one.
Or a T-shirt. Common sense ain't very common.
Yes, that's good. That's really good.
Common sense is an uncommon virtue, as I like to say.
There you go. Something like that. Exactly.
Okay. Actually, Rob wanted me to ask this question, and I think it's a very good one. We hear, I'm going to read it, okay? We hear that the mutation of the virus, which again has not been proven to cause the manufactured illness we are seeing, is going to be worse. We've heard that the mutation is going to be worse than what we're currently being exposed to. If our bodies are filled with heavy metals, which I know mine is, does this make us receivers because we have metals in our body that the mutation or that for the that the mutation could then interact with the one that we're being warned about, maybe through 5G, and then it could be activated or detonated or whatever words you want to use. Could it be targeted to our DNA weaknesses so that it would become kind of almost like the perfect crime? You know, you could never really the variables are so many. I mean, just the different types of aerosol spray combinations differ from one coast to another, not to mention the factories that are around. But the GMO food system is pretty consistent. The vaccine thing is pretty consistent. Are we waiting for something to be activated with this whole 5G thing, I guess is what Rob's getting at.
Well, you know, there's a lot of suppositions in this question. And, you know, since there's no current evidence of a virus that's causing any disease or even evidence of a new disease, it's really difficult to say. The 5G technology is also very ambiguous. In other words, it's unclear exactly what the technology will be, which frequency will be used for which aspect of it, what will be exposed to based upon that. It is interesting that despite all of the normal business operations being shut down during this time, that there is a feverish effort to rush the installation of this 5G infrastructure at a time when we already have a functioning telecommunications infrastructure. There doesn't seem to be an essential function there. I think it would be more essential to keep the supply chains for the food distribution system open. So I'm not sure exactly what the intentions are with that. And I do know that the FCC chair has already stated that there aren't going to be any research looking into the health effects of 5G, and there haven't been very many studies on 5G related frequencies. There are studies on other telecommunications bandwidths that have showed things like acoustic neuromas, which is a type of tumor in the inner ear that develops when people have prolonged time where they hold the phone against their ear talking on the phone. There have been reports near 5G antenna installations that people have suffered from headaches, nosebleeds, and ringing in the ears. And people have also reported those symptoms when smart meters were installed on their house, which has a strong Wi-Fi signal. Our body emanates electric and magnetic fields and electromagnetic frequencies. And these have been, you know, studied by some physiologists, and certainly they are a function that may be important in our physiology. There are a lot of energy healing modalities that are based upon interfering with these fields and radiation. So it would go to show that if you're bombarding a person with artificial wavelengths of electromagnetic radiation, that it could interfere with those patterns and cause a disruption to the normal physiology. So I was able to find one very interesting paper that was actually a study done by the CIA in 1977, and it was declassified. And it was studying the effect of EMF in the 60 gigahertz bandwidth, which is part of the 5G proposed technology. And in that study, which exposed mice to that radiation, what it showed is two very significant findings. There were separate studies on behavior, by the way, that I won't get into here, but you can look those up. But the two findings were, one is that it caused myelosuppression, which is suppression of your bone marrow's ability to make blood cells. So this resulted in low blood counts in all different types of cells, including white blood cells, red blood cells, so it caused anemia, as well as platelets, which are involved in clotting the blood. And the second finding that was significant is that it impaired our mitochondria's ability to take up and utilize oxygen. And in that study, it was impaired up to 64%, I believe, in the kidneys. So prolonged exposure in this way would basically cause organ failure and ultimately death if it persisted beyond a certain period of time. So these are certainly possible health effects from being exposed to that 60 gigahertz frequency band, but it's still not been field tested, and it's hard to say exactly how it will be utilized and what will be the exposure level. But certainly, it's going to have some kind of disruptive effect on our body's ability to maintain, its normal processes.
And I think that's brilliant, and he's right. And there's a lot of things that we don't know about this. One is, how much does it disrupt our physiology? Perhaps like vibrating the iron that's in our hemoglobin. That's one of the reasons why we end up with these high iron, high ferritin levels. Is that it's a supposition in the presence of these high electromagnetic frequencies, or is it something that's destructive to our physiology? And or it doesn't have to be an either or, and is it something that, because we know from Warburg studies way back in the 1940s that how you could actually eliminate viruses is by electromagnetic frequencies, that you could vibrate them until they shatter. And so so is it something maybe with this viral particle that when it's exposed to, and whether it's the exosome or the viral particle, when it's exposed to high frequencies, does it somehow make it spin in a different direction and make it be more virulent or more aggressive or more dangerous to the cell wall? And is it the combination of the two? You've got weakened and damaged tissues and cell walls, and then you've got a particle that's maybe being spun at a very high frequency that goes in and it looks like a little whirligig, in terms of like damaging if it's a protein particle that may be stimulated by these high frequencies. We don't know. I mean, there's an awful lot about all these things that we're talking about right now that because it's relatively new. I mean, they just started turning on these 5G farms, around the world, these ones that they have built up and had, it's not just like we have onesie twosie towers around. And it's sort of like, sometimes when they say about like contaminants inside of vaccines, if you were only getting one of those shots one time in your lifetime, then perhaps what was coming through that needle and those contaminants were not going to be that big of a deal. But when you get, as children, you get, a vaccine 2, 4, 6 months, 1 year, and 5 years. So you get like, 5 shots by the time you're 5 years of age. And there's never been synergistic toxicity that's measured within the things that are coming through those vaccines. And now you get multiple doses of 16 or 17 vaccines, depending on how you count them. And so there's not synergistic toxicity that's looked at. So the same thing with this, is there synergistic toxicity with what you were talking about with the barium and strontium and the aluminum versus in combination with the electromagnetic charges, in combination with whatever's going on in these people that are more susceptible with their polypharmacy, and they're older, by definition they may have weaker immune systems, and blah blah blah. I mean, there's a whole bunch of synergistic things that, it's by nature that medicine tends to be reductionist. Like, boil it down, here's your diagnosis, and it was this cause, this silver bullet, and here's the silver bullet medicine to fix it. And in actuality, it's much more complex than that. We're complex beings. The environment that we live in is a very complex soup, and we try to isolate these things out. When in truth, I think that if you really looked at it in a bigger way, it's the synergistic toxicities of all these things going on that's creating this thing that we call a disease.
Could there be, and this is a kind of out there question, and if you don't want to answer it, you don't have to, but could there be any AI component in this, whatever it is, given that we're filled with metals, like I mentioned before, we're kind of like receivers. It doesn't really seem like we're desperately in need of being able to download a movie quicker. It seems to me more like this is a surveillance setup. And I happened to be in a ordering some food the other day, standing in line, and the woman behind me told me that her husband is one of the guys that puts up the 5G towers. And so, of course, we got into a conversation. She said he's been working nonstop, and it takes him 2 weeks to put up one of the towers because they don't go up that quickly. And when he puts it up, he gets down off the pole and goes down to his computer and turns on the 5G. Now, I also have heard that this is going on in the schools, that while we're at home, in lockdown, which again, I love the words chosen. Um, I've got to question the possibility that there's a grander scheme here that might have something to do with AI, might have something to do with getting into our brains or something like that. If you would like to comment on that, please do, either one of you. And if you don't, we'll move on.
Well, that might be a better question for Ray Kurzweil. He's been talking about that for quite a while and actually predicts that we will basically have AI in our body, including in our cognitive functions by 2030.
Yeah, which is right around the corner when you think about it, right? And yes, he has. I mean, does he work for Google? Where does that, so we can like look up and see what Google wants us to see and all these other things. So this is one of the globalist goals, right? Is artificial intelligence and capturing all of our DNA. So that's the question that I have about all of this testing. Where are those samples going? I mean, once they look at whether or not it's positive for this supposed virus, however they define that, and they say we're either positive or not positive, however they define it. Well, what happens with the rest of those samples? I mean, we've been challenging the whole concept of heel blood spots that off of children that they're ostensibly just checking for PKU and things like that for a long time. And we found out that the DNA from those blood stops is stored at the CDC. And so it's like DNA harvesting. And so is that also one of the bigger, more nefarious hidden agendas of what's going on, to get a catalog of and to have more of a bigger population about the human genome? And then that goes into all of the electromagnetic frequencies and the whole concept of AI. I actually wrote an article on DNA vaccines and transhumanism that's on my website. And
Yes,
I wrote it like
I read
a year
it.
or so. I wrote it like a year or so ago. It probably just needs to be updated with more nefarious stuff that's happened since 2 years ago. It was pretty bad then.
Yeah,
It's just a whole
yeah.
lot worse now.
Dr. Tenpenny, I can't remember the name of it off the top of my head, but there's a vaccine for, SARS-CoV-2 currently in testing that
It's called
is,
FunVax.
I think it may be a different one. This one is, it's a plasmid DNA
And
vaccine.
it's supposed to be activated by electricity. That
Yeah,
one?
yeah.
Yes.
So, and this relates to 5G as well. So, there's a property called electroporation, and this is used in the laboratory, and it was, could be applied to things like gene therapy, where you're trying to get a gene put into a person that has a genetic anomaly or mutation, like people with cystic fibrosis, for example. And that technology was invented in the 80s, but it has not been successfully utilized to date. But electroporation is a method whereby you apply electric current to a cell culture or group of cells, and temporarily, because of the electrical disturbance, the cells create little pores in their membrane, and they allow free molecules to enter the cells. And so they're using this generally as a way to get cells to take up genetic material, and then they can look at the expression of that genetic material in the cells. And so this is the exact strategy that they're attempting to use for a vaccine. And I'm not really sure that it makes a lot of sense for that purpose, but what they say it will do is that they put the gene for a specific antigen from the virus onto a circular piece of DNA, which is taken from bacteria and engineered for this purpose. And they inject that through a special syringe that has 3 needles. And the needle in the middle contains the DNA, as I described, and then the 2 needles on the outside are electrodes. And they basically zap the inside of the tissue to create this electroporation so that those cells can take up the DNA. Now, depending on what gene is put in there, you could influence the physiology of whoever you give that injection to. It could be used as some kind of tracer. It could make some kind of foreign protein that could cause a variety of different issues, including possibly illness. They say that it's going to have your own cells be able to make the antigen that will represent the virus, which also seems a bit dangerous, because how would then your immune system, if it found that foreign protein, how would it differentiate self from the virus? But that goes back to a deeper issue, because I had mentioned exosomes before, which are made by our own body, and they're basically particles that our cells secrete that are under the microscope identical to what virus particles look like. And those particles have been shown to also contain what they call viral DNA or RNA that they've measured from other viruses. So if our own cells already contain that viral RNA, then isn't that already part of who we are or what we are? And so it's really unclear what they would be wanting to do by transfecting us with this foreign genetic material. But I find it to be quite scary of this possibility. And the way this relates to 5G is that 5G frequencies have been shown experimentally to also be used for electroporation. So they were used instead of an electric current to open up the cells and allow them to take DNA. So we know that the vaccines that are already in use also contain bits of DNA. Some of them are from aborted fetuses, and they have other sources, maybe from other foreign animals, like non-human. So if, for example, someone has received that kind of vaccine and then exposed to the right frequency of radiation that causes electroporation, that genetic material would be more likely to be taken up by our own cells and then made into gene products that could have who knows what type of effect.
And in that whole process, in addition to that, it's called insertional mutagenesis. So some of like the MMR vaccine and the chickenpox vaccine have more foreign human protein in them, because they're made from cells of aborted fetal tissue, then they actually have viral particle in there that they're injecting in with the vaccine. So this whole process of insertional mutagenesis is already happening. And now couple that with what you were just saying about what the what did you call it? Electroporation of this whole electromagnetic frequencies. It's just going to compound that effect. Just compound that effect. That's very interesting. Very interesting.
Dr. Kaufman, your video on explaining exosomes, I think, should be everybody's homework. They really need to understand this.
It's really good.
It's really good. It was so easy to understand. And
when I first saw it, the first thing that I said is like, this is the missing link.
This is the missing link. You're so right. You're so right. So I really hope that everybody will do their homework and watch that, because it's just chocked full of stuff we've never known or thought about, and completely shift the whole way we look at viruses. So I really hope, I'm hoping that one of the things you said in that video was that exosomes are produced more rampantly when we're exposed to fear. So I wonder if you both could talk about the physiological reaction to fear. I mean, obviously it does us no good to be in a state of fear. Can you talk about how that affects our bodies, our minds, our light bodies, or whatever, however you want to put it?
Why don't you go ahead, Dr. Tenpenny?
Well, sure, of course. Well, we're, in my opinion, and how I look at us, is we're spiritual beings having a physical experience, right? And so if you base if you base the premise from that, a spiritual being has a frequency, and so frequencies are affected by your thoughts, and thoughts are things, and words have power. And we've done some basic things with like muscle testing, when you do like muscle testing with people, and which was actually found in the 1950s. It's probably been before that, but they've been using muscle testing, testing your body's electromagnetic field and your energetic field for a really long time. And I love doing this exercise to show people how muscle testing works and how your mind works. And when you have people and you have them stand up upright and you hold their arm out directly to the side and be as strong as they can, and have them say happy, 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 and try to push their arm down, you can't. And then you have them say sad, 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 and there's nothing they can do to hold their arm up. or you have them say something negative, some negative sort of word. And to me, it's like the shocking look on their face. And I've always had this vision of doing that at some medical conference somewhere, with like 100 doctors or 1,000 doctors in the room, to show them how powerful your mind is, what the true meaning of placebo effect really is, and how we really should use it to the benefit of humanity and not use it disparagingly, and how it actually, those words, what comes out of your mouth, that resonant energy, because what are words is really, it's a vibrational frequency. And so what comes out of your mouth really affects your energetic patterns. So if you do it from a fear-based place, from that false evidence appearing real and negative, and the glass is half empty and all that dark stuff, you know that's going to contract or weaken your own electromagnetic field. And so, and then the, you know, if we actually as physicians need to be, in my opinion, again, we need to be experts in anatomy, physiology, biochemistry, and energy, including the Krebs cycle and all these other things, because that's what we do in terms of energy and energy of our thoughts and our electromagnetic field, which you can actually put a meter on and actually measure, right? You can actually put an ohm meter on there and measure it. But instead, what physicians end up being is glorified pharmaceuticals reps, like just handing out prescription pads. And so so we don't get into all of these different things that Dr. Kaufman unveiled in that video. I'm telling you, I did cartwheels when I watched that video. I literally did cartwheels. Like,
you get an award, Dr. Kaufman, for that video.
Yeah. Seriously, it was like I couldn't pass that on fast enough to so many people saying, this is the missing link. This is what we've been looking for, and particularly my area of all the vaccine stuff that I've studied for the last 20 years. This is the missing link. But that electromagnetic thing and the whole thing about fear, and how that fear like makes you like weaker, makes your immune system weaker. And you could get into the whole explanation about what that does to suppress some of your immune system. And so it's part of the programming. It's part of the programming to get you into that negative fear-based place, because then you're more susceptible to all kinds of things.
Right. I couldn't agree more.
And I can't wait to hear what Dr. Kaufman says about this.
Yeah, Dr. Kaufman, could you include, with however you respond, could you make sure you include how there are more exosomes produced when we're in a state of fear?
Yeah, absolutely. So
maybe you could give a little brief exosome, like if you could just give people who've never heard the word before.
Sure. Let me talk a little bit. Well, I want to piggyback on Dr. Tenpenny's remarks, because I think there's some very profound things you said in there. And like the muscle testing experiment you described is very important. And there's a similar experiment done with water. And I think water is an extremely important example, because we can actually influence water with our emotional state. And this is part of the placebo effect. I think that's a good way to describe it. So there's an experiment where you have, you take 3 beakers and you put rice in each beaker, and then you add water to each beaker. And you do this for a period of 30 days. So every day, to 1 glass, you say thank you. To 1 glass, you say you're an idiot. And the 3rd glass, you ignore. Okay? So at the end of 30 days, doing this once a day, what you find is that the glass that you said thank you to has been fermented, and it smells sweet. The glass that you said you're an idiot has turned black. And the glass that you've ignored is all rotten and smells foul like rotting flesh. So just by your intention, your emotional intention, you've had a major influence on the water and the microorganisms and how they interacted with the rice in this water medium. And so we have a very, very powerful ability to control our physiology. And you can even do this experiment with yourself. I've done this with my children, where you just focus on the water in your body, because our bodies are about 75 to 90% water. And if you express gratitude and hope to the water in your body, what you'll notice is that you will start to feel euphoric. You'll be smiling, you'll be tingling. And if you have very negative thoughts, like I hate this water, you're going to feel very different, very dysphoric. So this is really important. When people are in a state of fear, that's related to a survival state. And when you're in a survival state, all your energy is about defending yourself and surviving. You're scanning for danger. You're assuming danger is coming, and you're prepared to protect yourself. And it's a very energy intensive process. And if it's prolonged, you can basically burn out that energy and end up extremely exhausted. but it also really narrows your focus. When you're consumed by fear, you're not able to consider new ideas, you're not able to be creative, you're not able to take in new information unless it's directly relevant to survival. So it's a very unpleasant way to exist and really closes you off from things. And then it also has a major effect on your physiology. We know that when we are experiencing major stressful life situations, that we have a tendency to experience acute illness at a higher frequency. So we essentially worry ourselves sick. And this has been borne out with the exosome research that shows with a severe psychological stressor, like a severe fear reaction, that you actually induce your body to make exosomes. So I'll explain exactly what those are in a little more detail right now. So exosomes were discovered about 30 years ago, and they were found that actually all eukaryotic cells, which are cells that have a nucleus, so this doesn't include bacteria, but all higher celled organisms, plants, and animals, all make exosomes, and they are tiny little vesicles that are made from our own cells' membranes that are secreted. Um, they're secreted actually all the time at a low level, and then when there's almost any kind of illness, they are induced and start being secreted at a higher level. They contain some proteins in their membrane, like receptors, just like viruses would have. And inside, they contain genetic material, which could be of many forms, all the same forms that viruses are reported to have, which includes, DNA, both double and single stranded, also DNA from the mitochondria rather than a nucleus, and RNA, including microRNAs and messenger RNA. So those are basically the full complement that's also described as being contained by viruses. And these little particles, or exosomes, are generally thought to function primarily for long distance communication. And they would have a receptor, which is kind of like a special key. And there would be target cells somewhere else in your body that would have the lock that key fits. And the exosomes, just like viral particles, can't move on their own, can't reproduce on their own, have no metabolism on their own, but they passively flow around the body in the fluids and the blood, and eventually reach their target cell where they can bind with the special lock and key mechanism, and then their genetic material can be taken up by the target cell, and the information contained in that genetic material can be communicated. And it's mostly thought that the function of them is in response to some kind of insult, because that's when we see them being induced. So that could be from a toxic agent, such as a chemical. It could be an endotoxin from a bacteria. It could be a synthetic chemical like a pesticide. It could be a heavy metal. It could be a pharmaceutical. For example, antibiotics are shown to induce exosomes, and antibiotics are quite toxic not only to the bacterial cells, but also to our human cells. And they've also been shown that some exosomes can actually, outside of the cell, can take up toxins. And in one really elegant study where they were mixed with a bacterial culture that was secreting endotoxins, when they mixed it with mammalian cells that were expressing exosomes, the exosomes actually took up the endotoxins and those cells survived. When they mixed it with cells that were not expressing exosomes, those cells died from the endotoxins. So it's sort of like you could consider it part of our immune system, but it's not specifically from immune cells. It's from all of our cells and all the cells in all animals and plants.
So, Dr. Kaufman, when we see exosomes, could doctors confuse those for viruses?
Yeah, absolutely. And the way that the experimental procedures have been done to allegedly isolate viruses, and I've looked at many coronavirus papers, not just SARS-CoV-2 papers, but also other coronavirus papers, and they all have the same exact procedure. And what they do is they take the body fluid that allegedly contains a virus, and they mix that with some kind of foreign mammalian cell, usually monkey kidney cells called vero cells, and they add antibiotics to those cells. So we know if we take vero cells plus antibiotics that they're going to put out exosomes because it's well established that antibiotics induce exosomes. So then they take that mixture of cells and look at it under the electron microscope and see particles. And I've never seen a paper where they have like two different arrows and they say this particle is a virus and this particle is an exosome. They always say that the particles are viruses, and they never once mention exosomes in these papers. But since we know that they're basically putting the formula that's going to generate exosomes, they have to be there. So what I think has happened in all these papers is that they have mistakenly called these exosomes a virus. And you could replicate this experiment very easily. And you could just ignore, not put in the body fluid at all, just put those cells with the antibiotics, and you could get the same exact pictures as you get with the body fluid, because what they're seeing, I believe, is just exosomes.
Okay, I'm going to suggest again that people go and have a look at the video, because the video has charts and graphs and photographs and pictures, and it just makes it really easy for the average person to be able to digest that material, which I think is extremely important.
Can I ask a question? Because this is just fascinating.
Yeah.
And I think that two parts to this question. The first part is so with the understanding about exosomes, and I love the fact that you said they've been around for 30 years, because what that tells us is it's relatively new science, right? And it's something that should, most things in life progress and get better and change. I mean, think about what our dial-up phone was compared to our cell phone and things like that. Anything in technology, lots of things have changed over time, but not so much things like in medicine. And so exosomes are sort of like, so we still think about things like what we did, like with vaccines, like with Jenner and things like that. I mean, like, for example, like the toll-like receptors. I mean, those have only been around, since, I mean, the guy that discovered toll-like receptors got the Nobel Prize in 2011. This is brand new science, right? Just relatively new science. Exosomes have been around for 30 years. So does the discovery of and more research about exosomes, does that change the entire conversation about virology and viruses? And then the second part of that, does that mean that viruses really do or don't exist? Because that question comes up a lot. Like, people are saying, was there a bird flu virus or swine flu virus, or is there a virus, or is it really that the body's exposed to something and its own scrubbing mechanism, its own self-healing mechanism that bundles up these things in exosomes to like get rid of them? So I guess number one, shouldn't this move science forward because this is relatively new and we give up some of those things that we've clung to for 200 years? And number two, the second part, does that kind of change the whole concept of virology and viruses?
Yeah, well, these are great questions. And actually, if you look in the exosome literature, you'll see lots of papers that talk about viruses and exosomes either being the same thing or being very closely related. And there's a famous virologist, John Hildreth, who he's now the CEO of Meharry Medical College. And he wrote in a paper, the virus is the exosome in every way. So what I think may have happened is that back when the electron microscope was first invented in, I think it was the late 20s, early 30s, that they had already had the concept of a virus, and because there were illnesses that there were no bacteria observed under the microscope, and they already had the concept of a virus, and they thought there was a smaller particle that they couldn't see that was causing these illnesses. Like poliomyelitis was one example of an illness like this, that they were looking for a virus. So when they saw the first images under the electron microscope where there were these tiny particles that had never been seen before, I think they basically just said, there it is. There's the virus that's causing all these diseases. And they didn't say, well, that's an interesting particle. I wonder what it does. And so that they basically, in my opinion, have mistaken all along and have called these exosomes a virus. And they've been able to identify them under the microscope many times using the procedure that's set up to see them. And then through a different research protocol, they were discovered, and that's when they were able to be looked at more objectively and coined the term exosomes. And there's been actually an exponential growth in the number of papers on exosomes since that time. So there is a lot of scientific interest, and I think it is headed in the direction that ultimately they're going to see that these are the same thing. And there's many, many interesting things about exosomes, that they seem to contain genetic material from a lot of different sources. And there may actually be a transfer of material between individuals of the same species, and potentially even between different species, called the zoonotic transfer. And this would make sense in a community setting where you have different organisms living in the same environment, that they could pass information back and forth amongst each other for the purpose of giving information about what's going on in their environment, so that their bodies can respond to it. So this is a very interesting and exciting field of science, and I think there's certainly a lot more to discover, and that's where I think it's heading.
And what would
You
be
know,
really, really interesting, I'm sorry, Marcy, what
it's
would be really
okay.
interesting would be to look at the profiles of exosomes in vaccinated versus unvaccinated people. Because so many of the vaccines now contain, I mean, I'm going to say most of them have a fetal bovine serum in them. And fetal bovine serum varies from batch to batch to batch, because you got different baby cows. They know for a fact that there are over 1,800 different cytokine reactions inside of them, and more than 4,000 unclassified foreign proteins in a batch of fetal bovine serum, which is then being injected into children at 2, 4, and 6 months of age. And what does that do in terms of genetic material and different types of genetic material that you talked about inside of these different exosomes? And what could be another potential connection there that nobody's really looking at? So I think that, so this is in terms of just overall health, and how does this go into like these things that we're now calling viruses that maybe aren't, and what are, and they're passing around the world and causing pandemics that we're shutting down the world economy of. This is really, really important information to say that this is relatively new science. We need to be looking at this. So that's really
I was
fascinating.
going to mention about the passing along the messaging to the rest of the species. This is actually something that happens in the plant world. In fact, it was covered in my last film by Dr. Willie Smits, and he describes how the fungal network will transmit messages that are released from hormones or something through the fungal network to warn trees to protect themselves against, say, an infestation of some sort of an insect or something. So I have to wonder, are we doing this ourselves somehow in a way we don't understand, which then causes people to become symptomatic because they think that they have to be afraid, and, means, I need to, check into a hospital, because if that's happening, you're going to get a flood of people who are going to be so paranoid that they're sick that, well, I guess if that were true, the hospitals would be filled, and they're not. I drove down to my local hospital where my kids were born, and they had triage tents set up outside, and they were just sitting there bored, not a single person in line. They had them set up serpentine so that you'd have to wait your turn to get in there, and there was not a single person there. And I'm sure you've seen the videos running around about, New York City being the epicenter, and these are empty hospitals. So maybe my point is not exactly right, but I do wonder if there's a way we're transferring information sort of the way the trees do.
Yeah, Marcy, this is a fascinating subject, and there's a field of social science where they study social contagion, right? And so, a lot of people think contagion is passing an infectious organism back and forth, but there are certainly some things that, no one would think that are virus mediated, right? And one of those things that I think is quite fascinating is that women who spend a lot of time together and have close relationships end up synchronizing their menstrual cycles, right? And it's not really known what the exact mechanism that occurs by, but it certainly would seem like an interesting experiment to see if they are passing some kind of exosomes between each other that could information and help them to synchronize in that way. There's a lot of fascinating research that could be done, but the thing is that because the germ theory paradigm and that viruses cause these infectious illnesses is so prevalent, that there's no scientists and there's no research funding really available to look at alternative ways that our observations might be explained that may be more accurate. And, there's almost no studies really looking at contagion, even from the point of view of viruses. And the ones that have been done are either have a very flawed procedure, or they've showed that they were unable to transmit an illness that way.
Mhm. Very interesting. The wearing of masks, Dr. Mikowitz says that the wearing of masks actually is dangerous because you're breathing in your CO2, and she says it's an immunosuppressant that causes the sort of dormant, I guess, sequences or viruses or whatever they are to activate. And I want to know if you think that's true. And then on top of that, I would like to hear both of you speak about the metaphoric message being sent wearing masks, because for me it's a hear no evil, see no evil, speak no evil. And I see ourselves becoming surely more transhuman like as we distance ourselves. We can't hear each other, we can't see each other very well. And I think of babies who take in so much sponging in of faces. You watch babies watch faces, and they see the way they're reading eyes. They know whether to be afraid of that person or whether to coo and smile at that person. They see smiles. There's just a whole big learning experience that's getting covered up with these masks. And I also see people waiting outside to get in a place, standing on a blue line and acting afraid if you get too close. And it's almost like the trap door opens and the lab rat moves through and it shuts and everybody just keeps moving along. There are animated films like this in some of the film festivals I've been in that show this, opening the lid, pouring in information, and everybody's behaving this way. So I'd like you both, if you could, to comment on, is it physiologically not a good idea to wear a mask, and B, what is the psychological fallout from this?
Well, I would say yes to all of that. I would say that
Okay.
we are disrupting human interaction as we know it. I mean, humans are herd animals, and they like to cluster. They like to be close together. We like to hug. We like to kiss. We like to high five. We like to pat each other on the back. And there were studies that were done years ago out of, I believe it was Eastern Europe, where they put these babies in isolation, and they just picked the baby up once a day to just feed them, change them, they put them back, and they didn't have any human interaction. They didn't have any touching, smiling, all those facial expressions, and many of them died. I mean, they just died because they didn't have human interaction. And the ones that were doing really very poorly in the cribs and things like that, as soon as they took them out and started holding them and cuddling them and having human energy exchanges but what happens with touch, they were like little wilting flowers, and they sort of came back to life. And I do believe that this whole social distancing, as soon as they started using that word, that was the first thing I said to a whole bunch of people: social distancing. I mean, what kind of psychological psyops is that? Why didn't they just say, like, keep 6 feet apart, and just sort of like, we're going to, like, just for a period of time, we want to do that. But now that has become part of our language lexicon of social distancing and not touching. And how many of the politicians have said we're going to permanently eliminate handshaking? And you're never going to, that's just, it's just been around like forever. And you're not going to be able to go back into restaurants. I mean, they just did a thing here in Ohio that said, no mask, no service, no exception, none. And I read somewhere, this was a little bit ago, that they said because of the size of, even from their perspective, of this supposed virus that you could cough and spread around, and the size of the pores in the mask, that it would be like putting up a chain link fence around your garden to keep out mosquitoes. We're kind of like trying to protect from something that A, maybe doesn't even exist, and B, if it does exist, it's so much smaller than what is this chain link fence is. And yet, in the meantime, we're doing away with facial recognition. We're not having any fingerprints. In fact, I put together a meme that was meant to be quite sarcastic. That it said, I found a picture in Dreams Time of a gal that had on a black mask and black gloves, and I put on the meme. I said, "Who's keeping? We're tracking everything. Who's tracking the burglaries? I mean, we no longer have facial recognition. We wear gloves so we don't have fingerprints. And now that we're letting all the prisoners out of jail so they don't get this infection, I mean, who's tracking the burglaries? We're tracking if I have been in contact with anybody who's had a positive COVID test. They're going to put an ankle bracelet on me, or they're going to download a thing. I've gotten two in the last 2 days of a spontaneously downloaded app that tracked where people were, that said, that told this, one came from Slovenia and one came from Australia, that said, you are 10 kilometers, and then they got a message, you are 10 kilometers away from home. Why are you not social, isolating in your home? And
You got that?
yes, I do. And what trips,
Wow.
why do you have how do you have permission to be that far away from your home and not doing social isolation? And now we're telling people in the community that they need to become snitches and report people who are not keeping their social distance away from each other and who are not wearing a mask. They're not wearing a mask because now everybody has to wear a mask no matter what. And back to what Dr. Mikovits said about a mask being detrimental. I mean, even the U.S. Surgeon General has said these masks are detrimental because people who don't know how to, ostensibly the mask is supposed to be there so you're not touching your face, but the masks are uncomfortable. And people that aren't used to wearing them all the time, like maybe a surgeon who's used to having them on for hours, they're always messing with them. So they've got their hands on their face more than if they weren't wearing a mask. And the other thing is that if you have some other type of infection going on, like maybe you've got periodontal disease, or you've got something like that, that you're recycling and recirculating that. I mean, are you good? And maybe are you at increased risk of something like strep or staph or MRSA or something else that you may be exhaling and breathing back in that has nothing to do with this virus slash exosome thing that we are now shutting the whole world down for. So I think that there is so many social problems, so many health problems, so many interaction of changing humanity to not have any closeness, which again goes back to your question a while ago about AI and about artificial intelligence. Are we getting people used to not having social interactions, physical interactions, touching each other, hugging each other, kissing each other, having sex? I mean, all these different things that we do that make us humans. Is this the first step? Not the first step, but the next step down the pathway to the artificial intelligence that we're doing, that we're hooked up to the cloud.
Yeah, I think this is where they're going with that. And, I refuse to participate in these policies because, one, there's no evidence that they're helpful in any way. And absolutely, it doesn't take a genius to figure out that putting a mask over your mouth and nose is going to obstruct your breathing. And then what is the mask made of? So you're going to be, whatever it's made of, you're going to be breathing that in. So if it's made of fiberglass, you're going to be breathing fiberglass particles. Those are known to cause disease in the lungs. So this is definitely not for our health. It's for other reasons.
How do you go to the grocery store?
Well, I don't wear a mask and I go in. And in New York State, and I think most other laws, like I would definitely encourage people to look at the letter of the law, because in the New York executive order, it says, unless unable to be tolerated medically. So I can't tolerate it medically. I don't think anyone else can either. But that is my official legal reason for not wearing the mask if anyone asks me. And so far, actually, only one time someone asked me. But I told her the answer, and then I continued to make my purchase, and it was no problem. I do occasionally see other people not wearing them as well, but I'll tell you that whatever the consequences are, I'm not going to cooperate with these nonsensical mandates that, one, infringe upon my right to make my own choices about how I'm going to carry myself. And, I believe that I have the freedom to leave my home and to assemble with others and to have free speech. And I'm going to stand up for those rights. So there was a mandate that came down from the governor in New York that required people who work with the public to wear a mask. And so I had been employed part-time as a psychiatrist and doing that type of work, although it wasn't technically with the public, but nonetheless, they decided to enforce the mask wearing rule on me in that position. And I refused to do that. I offered to provide my services through telepsychiatry, which is an industry standard. So it's, I even did that during my training at Duke. So it's nothing on the fringe, and many doctors and other clinicians are providing services that way at present. And I was terminated from my contract as a result of this. So, I'm not saying that you should feel sorry for me, because I am moving into a new area where I can work with people outside of the general medical system to give them information about how they can really heal and what's really causing their disease. So I'm very excited about that. But I think it's important that we have to protect ourselves and look at this situation and say, you know, do I want to live in a world where people are alienated and afraid of each other, and that we have to isolate by ourselves and only interact through technology? And that's not a world that I want to live in. And I'm not going to tolerate steps toward that world. I'm going to do whatever I can to preserve our current freedoms and sovereignty. And that's the way I want it to be for my children when they become adults, and even right now.
Excellent. I feel the same way. I think, yeah, you get a round of applause. I believe that not consenting to the best that we can do is so important. And it's so important to show other people that you're doing that, because then it opens the door for them to feel more comfortable doing it themselves. So I completely agree. I'm never going to refer to this again as COVID. It is now the manufactured disease or illness, right? Illness. And let's see, we covered almost everything. I know that one of you has to leave right about now. So I guess there were a few more things I wanted to talk about, but I don't think we're going to get to them. Maybe I can just sneak in. What do we do about this mandatory vaccine coming down the pike? How do we protect ourselves from getting that? And how do kids go to school? You know, all the whole thing. What do you suggest on that? Both of you.
Well, part of the thing is that sometimes I've done so many interviews recently, but one of the analogies that I say for myself, because I've studied the problems associated with vaccination for almost 20 years, and I've logged well over 40,000 hours of my own time doing this. And I actually did the math on that. And yes, that is a real number. And so, and I feel a little bit like I've been Noah all these years, right? I've been saying, hey, it's going to rain, I'm telling you. It's coming, rain's coming, it's really coming. I bought the URL Coalition Against Mandatory Vaccination in 2002. And I did that because I sat around and I thought, what is something that I think everybody could get behind, including pro-vaccine people that really believe in the medical mysticism called vaccination. They really believe in that procedure called what could we all rally behind? And at that point in time, this was 2002, I thought, well, surely everybody could get behind the right to refuse. You know, if you want to vaccinate and you want to get your flu shot, okay, that's fine. But the separation between me and my government should be at the level of my skin. And I do not want to be injected with something against my will that is purely an experiment that violates the Nuremberg codes, the Declaration of Helsinki, and the mandates of the International Medical Society. And so I think that everybody should have a right to choose their bodily autonomy and what is going to be injected into their body, because, you know, once you vaccinate, in my opinion, you can't unvaccinate. You can do better, you can make the body healthier, but you can't unvaccinate. And so I've been working towards this since 2002 is the reason I say that. And I couldn't get anybody to go with anybody to listen to me, because all I would hear was like, oh, Sherry, they're never going to go that far. They will never stretch to the point where they will make these things mandatory. I go, well, yeah, it's going to rain. I'm telling you, it's coming. Really, it's coming. Really. And so now we're at the point that it's raining, and the boat's actually starting to levitate a little bit on the water because of so long. So we've had 20 years to try to get ahead of this curve. And so now when suddenly somebody says, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? I feel a little bit like, well, we can't stop fighting. We must fight for our right to refuse. And I think it's a sheer number of mass number of people that have to stand up and say no. Because the people that are passing these laws, and if they ratchet it up to the federal level in the US, Congress thinks that we who don't believe in vaccines are anti-science, we are tinfoil hat conspiracy theorists, and there's just a really small set of us, but we happen to be really loud. And so what we need to do is, there's an organization that it's called Millions Against Medical Mandates. And we actually have millionsagainstmedicalmandates.org that people can go out and just sign up for. There's no commitment. But what we're trying to do is gather millions of people to stand up and say they want to maintain their sovereignty, their right to refuse, their ability to do bodily autonomy and say what I want to be injected with or not. I'm not going to risk being microchipped with this next round of vaccines or tattooed or whatever they want to say, because I'm going to not be able to walk around with my little certificate that says I'm clean by their standards, whatever the heck that means. And we might lose this little piece of paper. So let's just make that convenient for you and put that in that little chip in your hand. And that dirty money that you've been handling that's spreading around disease, well, we'll make that really convenient too. You don't have to touch those coins or those bills anymore. And so that's where I think we're at. I think that we've been leading up to that for the last at least 10 years. And now we're kind of there. And so when people say, what do we do to stop it? I think our only really big chance is numbers. We have to have a huge number of people who are really, truly blowing back against this and saying, no, not only no, but hell no. I'm not doing that. I'm just not. And like what Dr. Kaufman's doing, it's just like, nope, I'm not doing it. I read the law and this is where my exemption is. And I think that the people who are making these laws not only in the US, but globally, because I have a lot of connections with people and things that are happening in Europe, they don't know. I mean, they, like, for example, I did an interview on Sunday, and it was with a person who lives in Missouri, and he said, my local guy, my local congressperson, who is now my local city council person, he's used to be a pig farmer. I mean, he doesn't know anything about health and vaccines and any of this stuff. And they're getting fed by the big lobbyists and all the money that's pushing them towards this, because humans are now just a commodity. They're no different than selling cell phones or light bulbs or kitchen chairs. We are just a commodity to the pharmaceutical industry. And the more widgets that they can stuff into us without killing us, because the more widgets, the more pills we take, the more vaccines we take, the more biologics, that's the more money for them. And they take it right up to the edge. They don't want to kill us because we're a commodity to them. That the more that they can do, they get away with, they do. And so I believe, it's my opinion, I mean, what can we do to stop it? I think we're kind of at the 11 and a half hour right now. And so in order to do that, I think you have to be strong in your convictions. And I think it has to be numbers. We have to show that we've got millions and millions of people around the world that are going to tell Bill Gates, no, we're not doing that. We're going to tell Tony Fauci, no, we're not doing that. We're going to tell Dr. Burke and all of her nefarious connections with Microsoft, no, we're not doing that. And that's why I've been so passionate about this. And I've always been passionate and done a lot of interviews, but in the last couple of weeks, I say yes to almost everybody that comes and asks me, because everybody has different audiences. And I think everybody needs to hear this. And I think that we are at that point in time that this is like our last hurrah to be able to say no to mandatorily being vaccinated. I've said for a long time, and I'll close on this, is that we have in the U.S. it's a states' right issue. It's not formally like in our Constitution it says what's not at the level of the federal government is delegated to the states. So vaccination has always been a states issue. But I've often said in the last couple of years, since in 2015 when they passed SB 277 in California and eliminated their philosophical exemption out there, I started saying, we're getting close to the point in time when the pharmaceutical industry is going to get really tired of fighting this on 50 different fronts. Mm-hmm. Because every time we get thousands of parents that go down to the Capitol in whatever your state is and show pictures of their dead or vaccine injured kids, and that gets on the news media or on the alternative media on the internet, and parents tell their stories and the Congress people and the state legislators ignore them, the pharmaceutical companies are saying, this makes us look really bad. It's really bad. We just look really bad when we do this. There's enough of this fighting this on all 50 states. Let's just ratchet it up to the federal level and make it a federal mandate and be done with it. Well, they have floated the Vaccinate America's Children bill 3 times through the House. Most recently was 2 years ago when it had 17 or 19 sponsors, all of them Democrats except one. They had one Republican so they could say it was a bipartisan bill, right? It didn't get any traction. It came up out of Florida. Federica Wilson floated it 3 times, and it came up out of Florida, didn't get any traction again. But all of us that have been doing this for a long time in our sector went, ooh, it's coming. It's coming. This federal mandate is coming. And now they've fabricated this whole pandemic, and now they're going to backdoor this and saying you have to be vaccinated to have employment, to go to school, to open your business. We're going to crush you economically so that you're going to be willing to take this thing that they're going to inject into you because you have to keep a roof over your head and feed your family.
People just have to wake up. People have to become more aware, or there's absolutely no discussing solutions. We're not in a wiggle room period right now anymore. It's the time is now to speak up and to do homework and figure out what's going on, because you're not going to get this information from the mainstream media. It's going to be work, and it's going to require that you relearn everything that you've been taught, because we've been lied to so much. So we're at a point right now where there's just no other choice. We're going to have to do this if we want to claim our sovereignty. We want to claim our freedom. I don't know what else to say to people. I don't know how to convey the urgency. I don't know how to convey to people, put your worldviews aside and just start over and look at all our history, everything that we've been lied to about, and do your homework. I don't know what else to say to people. Dr. Kaufman, do you want to follow up?
Yeah, sure. And well, let me first say that Dr. Tenpenny, I've been watching your work for a number of years, and I really appreciate all of the things you've uncovered in this space and all the advocacy that you've done. And I want to offer my efforts to assist in those pursuits as much as possible. And I've definitely been talking a lot about vaccines, and we could clearly do another show like this where we could debunk all of the science about vaccines as well. But to deal with what is coming with this mandatory vaccine situation, and Bill Gates in his TED talk basically stated that his hope is that with vaccines and family planning, that he will be able to reduce the world's population by 15%, which is over 1 billion people. So I think that the intent of this mandatory vaccine is quite nefarious. In terms of how can we, avoid this, Dr. Tenpenny is exactly right. If we simply refuse, and this is the solution to all of these draconian mandates that we've been subjected to so far, if we simply do not follow them, and it's more than a couple of people, like I might do this independently and maybe be made an example of. But if we get a threshold percentage of the population, then there's nothing that can be done to overcome that. We, the people, we actually have all the power. The folks in charge that are pushing all of this are very few in number. And if we simply refuse it, they will not be able to stop us by any means whatsoever. And I don't even think that violence is part of this. I'm not recommending to, act out violently. But I'll tell you that I am not going to physically submit to any vaccine. I would have to be physically restrained and subdued in some way for that to happen for me and my kids.
Creepy, horrible.
And one thing I want to couple right on the back of what he said is we don't need 100% cooperation with this. I mean, they have done lots of studies, that they've looked at social evolution and social change. And the magic number seems to be somewhere right around 10 or 11% of a population. That if you want to really shift a paradigm, it's 10 or 11%. Let's say 10% to keep the number simple. So if we've got 7.7 billion people on this planet, let's say there's 5 billion adults. Let's cut out the kids who really don't have a vote. There's 5 billion votes. That means we need 500 million people. I mean, that's in the big picture. It's not a lot. And because I think that now we've got the attention. In fact, the uplifting note about all of this stuff that's happening right now, whether you want to call it a virus or an exosome or whatever, but everything that's happening right now, I think has put global politics in people's faces right here. They can no longer ignore it. It's right here. They can't say, "Oh, I don't do anything with politics. I'm going to go to my yoga class, or I'm going to go go skateboarding, or I'm going to go fishing." It's right here because it's affecting your household, your economics, your children's schools, your education, your ability to drive, to go to the frickin' grocery store, for heaven's sakes. And so now suddenly politics is up front and center, and people are going, "What? Wait." And then the whole mandatory vaccination level, I think that there's many, many, many people who would say, yeah, they'll vaccinate their kids and that's what we have to do because they've never taken the time and they're too lazy to even read a package insert. They're too lazy to even ask a question, what's coming through that needle. They're too lazy for that. But now suddenly we've got the whole world going, we're coming after you now. Me? What? You're not going to vaccinate me. That's not happening. No, 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 no. And now suddenly people are going, wait, somebody's going to vaccinate me against my will? Ain't happening. And especially in the Midwest. And so now we are at, I think, at a place that if we take the messages like you're doing with this film, we talked about here, we get this out in a really big way of saying you have choices, you can make a change differently, that we've got a window. It's not going to be open for a long period of time, but we have a window of opportunity right now where people are like really knowing that something just ain't right here. It's just not right ever, because it's in their face. I mean, it's like the whole thing about tornado drills, right? You hear it on your thing. Nobody goes to the basement, so the trees are falling down in your backyard. Well, guess what? In the entire freaking world right now, trees are falling down in everybody's backyard. They're paying attention.
And 75% of our insects are gone.
We have these people that are never going to change. They're always going to be fearful. We're going to have them snitching on us for standing too close together. We got that population. We have to focus on the people that are almost there.
Yeah, Dr. Kaufman, you said that same thing. I heard you say that.
They've really started to doubt and change. And so that's the part of the bell curve where we have to go. We don't have to preach to the choir. We don't have to preach to the choir. They're already there. They're already with us. We need to put the people that are at this quarter of the bell curve. These people over here, what their contribution is, they get to die off. So they'll go away. That'll move the curve forward, right? Okay. So from the 50 percentile over this third quadrant, those are the people that we need to focus on to move them. Preaching to the choir, the dinosaurs, nothing we can do.
Okay.
Doubt with people that suck the life out of you, and you spend all their time on it, and they're probably going to go with the dinosaurs.
Right.
We need this quadrant over here.
Okay, great. We will finish there. I want to just, now that Brandon's back, if I could just make that last point, which is that I don't know how it has escaped humanity's notice that so few people are controlling this entire charade. People think it's so complicated, and they think that, what happened to you there?
Oh, nothing. I'm trying to, we've got this sun thing, because I'm sitting by I'm just trying to.
I see.
I tried to put a little thing.
The costume change.
Presto changeo, right? Into the nearest phone booth, right?
You guys would laugh if you saw my mask at Sasquatch. I have a Sasquatch mask that I put on. Anyway, whoops. Okay, yeah, there you go. So I just would like to make that point that somehow it has escaped humanity's notice that so few people are controlling this entire charade. And I really hope people will start to figure that out, because it's those same people that are in charge of the big ag charade, big pharma charade.
Making us kill off all of our food source and all of our food supply. And
oh my goodness.
What's up with that?
So, okay, so I think we're good. And now I can properly thank you both and say how incredibly honored I am to be able to have this discussion with you both. And if either one of you would like to continue any type of discussion with us in the future, I know Rob and Brandon would be thrilled. And I just also have to just express my gratitude for the work you do. I know how hard this is and how isolating it can be and ostracizing it can be. I really know this firsthand. So
I feel like I got 3 new buddies though.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You do. Yeah. There's no manufactured illness on my finger there.
There you go. Yep. So, all right. Anything else you guys want to say? Because I'm going to have to run.
Yeah, no, I just thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you guys so much for doing this.
Yeah,
I really appreciate it.
100% pleasure and interesting. So,
awesome.
Wishing you all the best, all 3 of you.
All right. Andy, I'll be in touch.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Look forward to it.
Okay.
All right.
Take good care.
All right.
Okay.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Brandon?
Yes.
That was just fantastic.
That was, oh my God, that was amazing. I was planned on maybe chiming in a couple times, but I'm like, I'm just going to let them talk. There's no reason for me. This is perfect.
They just took it over. I mean,
yeah.
It seems they've made a nice friendship, the 2 of them, and they can be very powerful together.
All right, that'll do it for this edition of the Round Table. To keep this conversation going, make sure you check out all the links below. All the links to everything we talked about and more are below. I'd like to thank Rob from transparentmediatruth.com. I'd like to thank my cat for interrupting this outro. I'd also like to thank one more time Dr. Tenpenny. I'd like to thank one more time Dr. Kaufman. I'd also Especially like to thank one more time Marcy for all those great questions and keeping the conversation flowing. Thank you everybody for watching. We'll see you next time.